Welcome to For the Health of It, an intimate look at public health in Cowley County, Kansas. Join us as we discuss topics that are impacting public health in our community and learn about what we do at your local health department. Welcome once again, everybody, to another edition of For the Health of It, Cowley County. I'm Tom Langer, the Health Department Administrator and Public Health Officer. And today our topic is entitled, Get the Lead Out. And we're going to take a little bit closer look and an examination of lead poisoning, how people get it, especially how it affects children. And we're recording this in the middle of National Lead Poisoning Prevention Week, if I remember correctly. And so we'll give you a little bit of background on why this is an issue. And with me today, as always, is my trusted confidant, Allie. How are you today, kiddo?
I am doing okay.
You ready to talk lead? Yes. All right. I'm telling you what, this is one of those things that's kind of like a walk down memory lane for me, because I entered the public health field a little over 18 years ago, and this was kind of my first assignment. My thing was I worked for the Kansas Childhood Lead Poisoning Prevention Program, which was part of KDHE. I rose through the ranks there. I became director of the program, and then after that, I became the director of environmental health for the entire state of Kansas. But I spent a lot of time becoming an expert in subject matter lead poisoning, especially how it affects our children. So I'm going to go through some of that with you and give you a little bit of background as to, why it's still prevalent today and why it affects us and why we're still concerned about it. So lead poisoning, by its very descriptive nature, is basically toxicity that the human body has to lead. And the way that we can be exposed to lead is generally through the environment, because environmental lead is where it comes from. So lead is a naturally occurring element. It's a heavy metal. Our bodies, from a physiological standpoint, have no requirement for it. We need zero lead in our systems. There are metals that our body does need. Iron, zinc, things of that nature, chromium a little tiny bit. There are certain elements that our body needs to function properly, but lead is not one of them. However, lead is a great mimicker. It is one of those things that if it does get into our body will look at it and it'll say, I don't know quite what this is, but it's close enough to like iron, and it's close enough to this other thing that we don't have it. Maybe we're going to hang on to it. And so the body will grab it and it'll hold on to it. And that can be a problem, especially if we have exposures that are chronic in nature. Now, Allie, I want you to explain to people the difference between an acute exposure to something and a chronic exposure. Can you do that for me?
Yeah, sure. So an acute exposure would be just that. It would be an exposure that it's minimal. Your body is maybe not going to metabolize it in the same way. And generally speaking, the effects of that are not going to be as harmful if it were a chronic exposure. Ongoing, your body is metabolizing that heavy metal. It's impacting your body systems. Those impacts are going to be long-lasting and maybe even forever lasting, truthfully.
It is the difference for people to understand, kind of in a common terminology. Acute is one and done, whereas chronic is over and over and over again. We talk about chronic illness as opposed to something that, like an acute illness or something that, maybe I break a bone. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's an acute incident where I'm going to get it set, my bone's going to heal, I'm going to recover, as opposed to having a degenerative disease that's chronic and it doesn't let me go. So that's what people need to understand. And we talk about exposures in environmental health that are that way. If you're exposed to it once, like an X-ray, right? An X-ray is an acute exposure to radiation. Not going to be enough to harm you, but if you're exposed to that radiation day after day after day after day, it does have cumulative effects and it'll hurt your body. That's what we're talking about with lead, especially in the environment. Okay? Now, there are a number of different organizations that all have a lot to do and say in the United States about lead exposure, especially in housing and to children. The Consumer Product Safety Commission, which is one that we don't talk about a lot, but has a big role, they actually were the organization, they're the federal organization that stepped up and put the ban on lead in paint back in the 1970s, okay? Consumer Product Safety Commission. Their background on that, or their logic was, they knew that it was a hazard to the health of children and to all people, really. And so they moved to get rid of it. But lead had been part of our lives for centuries moving into it because of the fact you go all the way back to I think I was mentioning this to you earlier, back to the 4th century BC. Okay, the Greeks, the Romans, they learned a lot about metallurgy and how to mold metal. And, we talk about the Bronze and the Middle Ages. They learned a lot about that, and they noted the toxicity, okay, of lead, especially for the workers who were engaged in working with it all the time, and how it basically made them have seizures and they would die. I mean, those exposures at that point in time when you knew nothing about it had to be just astronomical. They had to be so far off the charts that it caused, human death. But it was recorded in literature back then. And even at the turn of the century in the United States, we knew about its toxicity levels, but it's such a useful tool. I mean, it is one of those things that, I became a historian on lead, especially in Kansas, because that's where I lived and worked and wanted to find everything about it. Part of our state, down in the southeast corner of the state, not too far from where we are, was capital of the lead belt. Did you know that in the Civil War, all of the bullets, the shot, the round shot that was made for the use by the Union soldiers was all mined and refined out of Kansas? And on the other side, for the Confederacy, all of it came out of Missouri.
I didn't.
Look, there are towns in Missouri, Galena, and there was a Galena in Kansas, and we were a free state. So, I mean, and this is the lead belt. It's very steeped in history, and it's interesting to take a look at. But I digress, and I don't want to talk about all the history, even though I do kind of find it fun. Instead, I want to talk about why is it important? How is it still affecting us now in 2023? We're talking about hundreds of years ago when this was a huge problem when it was all being used. And the reason being is because lead was one of the primary components of paint, or what we call surface coatings, right?
Sure.
Have you ever heard the term, it wears like lead?
Yes.
Yeah, it does. It's an amazing thing. What the real purpose of lead in paints was, it was a great preservative. It would be mixed with the linseed oils and the other things that the painters would use, and it made the greatest house paint. I mean, and it was in everything. It would make the oils and such dry faster, and then the coating that it left behind, it basically wore like lead because you covered it with this thin sheet of lead all over the house or houses, and not just on the outside, but on the inside. It repelled water, it sealed it up, it was a mildicide, so you didn't have mildew that would happen. So in any place in your house where you had wet surfaces like bathrooms, kitchens, they mixed it into floor paints. Have you ever been into old houses where the porches are painted?
Yep.
And the floors painted? And then when you go into the older homes and you look and say, oh, look at the beautiful old oak floor, the varnishes and the shellacs that they put on the floors, it also had it in that, on the banisters, the woodwork. I mean, it was just all over the house. When we made plasters, they mixed white lead in with the plaster because it would allow the guys that would create the wall. And you know what I'm talking about in lath and plaster, anybody that's been in one of those old houses where it's not modern day drywall. If you ever try to hang a picture in a lath and plaster house, and you come up with just a little tiny nail and you tap it with the hammer and it basically shoots a quarter-sized chunk of rock out of the wall, you've got lath and plaster walls, That's why people have 16 penny nails hanging up to hold grandma's picture, But all of that would be put in there because it allowed them to make that surface nice and smooth, and it would dry quick, and it would just last. I mean, it lasts forever. That's why we still have houses, even in our communities today, that have lead-based paint on them because it has lasted centuries almost. And here's an irony. Who do you think got the most lead in their paint by painters back in the day?
The painters?
No, not the painters. Come on. If I'm a customer, okay, you and I are customers, all right, and here you are, my assistant, and here I am, the big shot guy, and we hire a painter, and you're going to have him paint your house. And I'm going to have him paint mine. And
give us more.
And he gives you a bid, okay?
Sure.
And he gives me a bid, and I can pay you a little bit more.
Right.
He's going to throw more lead on my house. So the irony of it all is in those old stately homes that were owned by bankers and politicians and lawyers and all that, the people that had the money, they had more of that stuff put on those homes. When you go down and go through our towns. Think of the ones that we have here just close at hand. And those stately homes, those bad boys have lead-based paint.
Big, tall, white homes.
Yeah, man, all over that stuff. And it's still there. It may be under 4 or 5 different coats, but it's still there. And so it's not gone. And until all those houses are gone forever, it never will be. And that's part and parcel as to why. Now, when it's intact and it's sealed up, it's not a problem. But when it becomes disturbed, when that paint chips or cracks or peels, then it does become an issue. One of the things that we talk about is the fact that lead is lead. Now that sounds really funny, but what does it mean? It means that if I have a chunk of lead in my hand, that's 5 pounds or so, okay, an ingot in my hand, or if I'm holding a plate out of a car battery, or if I've replaced the windows in my old home and I have those old counterweights that are about a foot and a half long and they measure about an inch around, those are lead weights, okay? I have one of those. That lead composition is exactly the same as the lead that poisoned us. The only thing that's different is the size. Because lead doesn't change, but it can be reduced to a microscopic level. And so that's where the issue comes in, because when lead is deteriorating down to small pieces that are dust size, that dust is so toxic that when it enters the human system, especially for a child, that's where it has the greatest health consequences. Allie, we talk about being concerned about kids 5 and under for lead poisoning. Why is it that that's that important in that age group?
That first 60 months of life, or that 5-year mark, is very important for development, all different types of development. So that being hindered in any way is not great.
All right. And that's when they're growing the most rapidly?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And what do we know about little ones, especially toddlers? Where do they spend most of their time?
On the floor.
On the floor. What do we know about lead? Is it lightweight like a feather, or is it heavy? Is it going to fall?
It's heavy.
It's falling. It's going to be down there. And where's the dust settle in a house? Along the floor.
And you can't see it.
You don't see it. That's it. And around the windows, especially if you have those are called friction surfaces. So imagine we have an old house and they have painted windows, and they still work up and down, up and down, up and down. Every time you open and close that window, you are grinding that paint off and you are reducing it to dust. And it gathers in those windowsills. And I don't know if you've ever had I can only talk about my kids. I know that when they're little and they first are able to stand up and are toddling around, they love to grab onto something that's about that same height as a window ledge. They'll get the little fingers up there and they're going to look out the window. And then those little fingers come back and they'll have dust on them. And then what happens with that?
They're going in their mouth.
That's right. They are the most hand-to-mouth people that you will ever see.
Thankfully.
They are. Everything they pick up goes in the mouth. And that is why they have that pathway of exposure. That is key, and we have to understand behavior of humans. Now, there are a lot of adults that have things that they put in their mouths all the time.
Or things they chew on.
They chew on, right? Pens, pencils. If you smoke, that's bad. But anyway, the point is we talk about how does the lead get into the body, and it will get in either through ingestion, inhalation, sadly through injection. You actually can't have lead injected into your body. I hate to talk about it. It does happen. It generally comes at you at about 1,200 feet per second, and it comes right out of a gun. And I talk about that because I remember a 16-year-old boy that had acute lead poisoning because he was shot. How do we track it? How do we measure it? Well, we measure it through looking at the percentage of lead in the bloodstream. Okay, it's called a BLL, or blood lead level, and the amount that someone should have is really zero, but in reality, I would imagine that 99% of humans walking the planet in the United States of America has some level of lead in their bloodstream right now, including me. Allie, it's really been an interesting journey for me during my time in lead poisoning prevention, because I recall when I first started, over 10 years ago, the levels of the recognized amount of lead in somebody's bloodstream back then were around 10 to 15 micrograms per deciliter. And a lot of good work has been done to bring those levels way, way down. It started out at 15, it dropped to 10, and then in more recently it went to 5, and I think it's even different now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 3.5 micrograms per deciliter now.
And that's a really, really, really tiny percent. I mean, that is so small. Everybody can think about a 2-liter bottle of pop. If you were to open up a little packet of sugar, like you go into the diner, or take a sugar cube, or just open a sugar bowl if you use it at home, and you take 1 grain of sugar, 1 grain, and drop that grain of sugar into that 2-liter bottle of pop, or that 2-liter bottle of water, whatever it's going to be, and it dissolves fully, that is enough to raise, if that were lead, to raise the blood lead level up to the threshold of concern under today's standards. That's how small it is, and that's why parents have to be really alert, and they have to understand the exposures that might exist in their own homes. So it's something that I don't know, as hard as we try, that we'll ever get rid of all of it. And I knew a long time ago that it was going to be kind of an uphill battle, because I have seen kiddos that, they grow up in housing that is substandard. Allie, we talk a lot in public health, and I think a lot of people hear terms about it. In the last few years, the term equity has been thrown around a lot. Tell me, Allie, in public health, what does that mean?
Equity is essentially trying to make sure that everybody who is, in an area, in the public, has the same kind of access and availability to different types of resources that would make them be the healthiest, which gets messy because the things that you need and the things that I need, they're not going to be the same. You might need more of something, I'll need less of it. So it's hard to measure equity, but it's essentially making sure that everyone has the same access, the same opportunities to achieve optimal health.
Right. When we talk about housing, when we talk about equity in housing, I don't think it's very difficult for people to use their eyes and look around a community and kind of figure out where the old houses are, where the houses that have not been very well kept are, and you can see the difference in the conditions. And generally, the older homes that fall into disrepair, they're not cared for, they're not painted up, they're not taken care of at all. Those are the ones that if a person comes along and wants to buy it and move into it or rent it, they're moving right into an area where they're going to have a far greater chance of being exposed
certainly
to environmental lead. And if they have kids, they're going to be far more likely to be exposed and ingest it and become lead poisoned, right?
Yes.
Doesn't mean that it cares about what color we are, even how much money we have, or anything else. Because I know a lot of folks who love old homes. They want to go in, they want to renovate them, they want to make them like new again. And in all of that work that they do, what they end up doing is going in and disturbing all of those old surfaces. They bring them out. There was a case that I recall when I was at KDHE, and she was the cutest little 4-year-old blonde girl, blue eyes, just a cutie pie, Mom was I think the mom, if I remember right, she was like an attorney, and the dad was a young engineer, and they bought this beautiful, grand old home, and they went in to fix it up, and they were living in it while they were doing it. Well, in the process of, sanding old paint surfaces off and redoing all this and heating it up and scraping the paint off, they poisoned their daughter without even knowing they had done it. The only way they found out was that she was due for like a preschool checkup. And part of that checkup included a blood test. And in that blood test, that blood lead level was way off the charts. Now, of course, they were just beside themselves. They had no idea, and a lot of people don't. They just don't think about that. The sad reality of it is once you're lead poisoned, you're lead poisoned. Your body can give up that lead that is in your bloodstream, and it will pass out. It takes generally about 28 to 32 days for that cycle to complete itself, so that when we talk again about an acute exposure, if you can sever the pathway, the ingestion pathway, stop it completely, replace the body's need for whatever it thought lead was, like iron or something else, by enhancing the diet, more vitamin C, more iron, like green leafy vegetables, all of the things that the body needs, really giving it a lot of fluids, your body will actually kind of flush it out. It will pass in that time through urine, feces, out your hair. Your hair will grow it out, believe it or not. But it takes about that time. That's why when we have a kid come in and we have somebody that tests, we look to confirm it right away. In other words, that the initial test wasn't a bad one. So say you have a little one and you bring it in, and your little one comes back with a 5 to a 10. We want to verify that, so we're going to ask to do it again. The initial testing is generally what we call a capillary test, right?
Right.
And then the confirmatory one is venous. Let's talk about that a little bit so that people know what we're talking about. I want you, as my epi, to explain to people the difference between the capillary test and that venous draw for confirmation. Can you do that?
Yeah, so that first test, or that screening that is often done, is the capillary test, like you referred to. That test is most often done with just a couple drops from the fingertip. It can be run within minutes. You're going to get a quantitative value. That value would then determine next steps.
Mm-hmm. And like I say, and if it's over that threshold, then we want to confirm it, right?
Yeah, certainly.
Because sometimes, when you do a finger stick, there might be something on the hand that we didn't get cleaned off properly.
Sure.
We don't want to alarm or act inappropriately if we are not sure. So we'll look for the confirmatory test, which is a venous sample. Now, that's a little different, right?
Right.
And that includes what, a needle stick?
Yes, and it's going to be more invasive. It's going to require more blood, and it's going to take a little while longer to find out that quantitative value.
We send those off to the laboratory.
Yes.
And they do that testing. And then we get that result back and we know it. And then what we will do, of course, is have a long conversation with the parents, try to understand exactly what's going on in that child's world.
Right.
Because that's it. Sometimes it will require perhaps a visit to the home. Okay. Well, a lot of times that is, what we want to do. It's not like we're trying to shame anybody, but we're going to go out and we have to see the environment. We have to see the physical environment that the child is living in or staying in, so that we can identify the sources where it may be coming from. And then, again, we provide the information on how to sever that ingestion pathway. Okay, that is key. Now, we talk about ingestion because that is, I would say, for the vast majority of cases, that is how it gets in.
Sure.
Okay, through the mouth. There are other pathways. We talked about an acute one in injection, and the other one is inhalation. Do you have any idea how people could be lead poisoned through inhalation? Do you know anybody that is an avid hunter and shooter, and they like to mold their own bullets? Or do you know anybody that's maybe a fisherman that likes to make their own lead weights or their own jigs, and fishing lures? Or do you know anybody that is a welder? Or do you know anybody that likes to do lead glass, like stained glass work with that's, it's all held in by the pieces of lead? Any place where we can heat that up. Lead has a really low melting temperature. I mean, you can put it on a hot plate in a pan and you can melt lead. But remember what I said early on in this, that lead is lead regardless? You can vaporize lead by heating it up. So this happens also in housing repair where people would use heat guns, and they'd go out and they'd heat the paint up, and then they'd scrape it off, because it would become pliable. But when you do that, you aerosolize it. In other words, it releases this little tiny, tiny particles up into the air. And if you're sitting there and you don't have the appropriate, now people are going to cringe, oh, he's talking about masking again. But this is an entirely different kind of mask. This is an actual gas mask that is very tight fitting around your nose and mouth, and it has a particular type of canister on it. They're the purple ones, okay? They filter out lead, okay, at the most tiniest of levels. Anyway, if you breathe that stuff in, you're putting it directly into your bloodstream. I mean, it's going right into your lungs and boom, it's there. That is the fastest way to become lead intoxicated.
Sure.
Okay. And believe it or not, I actually had a situation like that. I can tell you all these really sad stories about a little boy who was about 3 years old, who had a really off-the-chart blood lead level. And we talked with mom and dad and everything else when we went out to the house. House was newer. House was built like in the 80s. Dad was a hunter. Dad liked to fish. He had a hot plate set up out in the back where he would melt stuff and pour his own, make his own jigs and such like that. I saw it when I walked up. I knew right away. It crushed them. But here was the little guy out with Daddy right there and just inhaling all of that stuff. And I said, Dad, you're going to have to take care of yourself too if you could do this. Take the right kind of precautions. People that do stained glass, oh my gosh, I'm doing this. This is such wonderful. Look, it's all this crafty stuff, No, you do it. Welders, people that were used to be in the radiator repair business were also environmentally exposed. You know that Kansas has one of the largest segments of any place in the country that is exposed to lead through their work, because we have battery manufacturing plants in the state up around Salina, Exide Battery and all those people that work in those factories, they're constantly being monitored. And it's kind of scary how high their blood lead levels are. But the bottom line is that it's really not good. Now let's talk real quick about what happens in a child if they have too much lead in their bloodstream for too long of a period of time. Lead acts like an insulator, and the body looks for a place to store it. And in a baby, in a little infant, the thing that's developing the fastest is the stuff between their ears,
right?
That brain tissue. It's growing and it's going quick, and the body's looking for a place to put this lead, and it puts it up there, and it basically acts as an insulator between the nerve synapses. So how could we talk about that in a podcast and relay it orally so people could get it? It's like you have a wire that gets cut and you put a switch in there, and you want to be able to throw that switch so that an electrical impulse will pass through the wire. But if you go in there someplace and you sever it by putting something that little electrical impulse cannot get through, like a piece of lead, it covers that up and it eliminates that forever.
Right.
And that's what happens. And those things basically lead to developmental delays. If it's really serious and in the system long enough, it can lead to damaging of the filtering organs. And those developmental delays will then follow that child through their entire life. They don't learn as well. They misbehave more. They're irritable. They're difficult to deal with. There's a lot of science behind all of this. And we want to make sure that people understand we're not just making this up. There's reasons why we don't want your kids exposed to lead, even in 2023.
Right. And when we're talking about things like the nervous system, like you were, that once those memory cells know that was a thing, even if you do remove those exposures, that's still going to remain in the body.
Yeah. It's there. It doesn't go away. That's one place that doesn't. Remember, I talked about it'll flush out of the bloodstream, but it doesn't go. Now, here's another thing that you may or may not be aware of. If you have chronic exposure during your lifetime, say you as a child, Allie, would have been exposed and you would have had a lot of it. And I mean, we're talking a lot. It would store in your body's soft tissue. It would store in fat cells. It can store in bone.
And teeth. And
teeth. That is correct. And then here's another thing that will happen. Say you as a young woman then become pregnant, okay? And your body suddenly is going to say, I need all of the things that you've been saving. Mm-hmm. It goes out and grabs all of that stuff from your body, and guess what it does? It provides a brand new gift to the unborn child. The thing I want to make sure that people take away from our chat today is we cannot tell you everything, but there are so many publications that are out there that can help you identify the sources of lead in your home. All you need to do is go on the internet if you have the access and just do that, sources of lead in my home. And it'll take you to EPA publications. It'll take you to all types of publications that can tell you about how you can identify where lead is located in a home, even brand new ones. And then you can take the steps to make sure that you minimize your exposures. The other thing is contact the health department. Give us a call if you want to know a little bit more about it. If you're concerned about your home, you have little kids, hey, give us a call. We'll put you in touch with one of our Healthy Start home visitors, and we can maybe arrange to come out and take a peek if need be. But the other thing is get your child in for their regular Can Be Healthy appointments or their well child checkups, and request at that time that we do a blood lead test. It's very minor. It's not something. Will a little one cry? Yeah, probably, because it's something different. It's a little tiny finger stick. I mean, it's not anything.
Right. It's less than a pinch.
Yeah, it's less than a pinch. But what we can find out from that can do it. And in a lot of our programs, I think it's a mandatory thing. Is it?
Yes.
Not,
Yes,
I think we have to do it with all of the kids that are in WIC. But it's not, like I said, this is not something that is stuck just with one group.
Right.
This is an equal opportunity, a poison, and it's everywhere in our environment. And we've only had a few minutes to talk about, just stuff in housing, and we really haven't even gotten through all of that. We haven't even touched the surface, so to speak. You have questions, or you want to know anything else? Or anything else that you want to share?
Make sure that you're being tested. Make sure that you're paying attention to your kiddos.
Yeah, I think that is it. Remember, take care of your home, take care of your property. Hey, if you're a renter, you have some responsibility. Keep your house clean. This sounds really funny, but I mean, we're talking about making sure you keep it dusted, you keep your floors clean, you mop them up, you wipe down your windowsills. That sounds funny, but a damp cloth that goes along, and you take the dust off the sills and keep kids away from those areas. If you are a landlord and you own a rental property, hey, put some money into it and make sure that the house is painted properly and it's maintained from the outside like you have the responsibility to do. If everybody works together, if you're a homeowner, it's all yours. It's all yours. But those are the things that you really have to do, because we can live with this. We can live with it safely. We can get through it. But you don't want to be the person who has the child who does poorly in school or misbehaves all the time, and you cannot figure out why. And then find out, down the road that, oh my gosh, it was because we inadvertently poisoned our child.
Right.
And that's a terrible thing to even think about. And I know that it happens. I've seen it. I stand witness to those things. Here in the state of Kansas, it happens all the time. Here in Cowley County, it happens all the time. We don't want it to happen to you. Anything else that we want to talk about?
I think we're good for today. I do want to tell everybody that we have our upcoming community baby shower next week at the Physicians Pavilion here in Winfield. It'll be from 9 to noon. It's a free event. So if you are expecting your family's growing or you have recently grown, come see us.
Absolutely. It'll be a great time. As a matter of fact, I'm going to talk about this topic.
Yes.
A little bit.
There are going to be all kinds of prizes and giveaways and sweet treats too.
Yeah. So, okay. I think we're probably doing okay time-wise. This has been a conversation that I know I could spend the entire afternoon talking about this stuff, but I don't think people want to hear about the history of lead. And just one other little trivial fact. Plumbum, That's the
Yep.
that's
PB.
Plumbum, okay? That comes from Latin, from Rome. It's what they used to make pipes. It's also what they used in pewter and what they made a lot of their wine casks and such from, okay? And I tell you the story because, do you know who Nero was?
No.
Emperor Nero.
Oh, sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
ever heard about him? He did something as Rome burned. He played the fiddle, right?
Yep.
You know that Nero was lead poisoned because he drank too much wine that was stored in lead containers. When you think back, did you realize that Beethoven, who was one of the greatest classical composers of all time, was stricken deaf because he was lead poisoned? All of these things. See, I told you I was a historian about this stuff because I'm one of those people that when I get into a topic, I want to become so well-versed. I want to know everything that I can about it. And all of these little stories, they illustrate just exactly where we have been and where we go. You know that lead in paint is still a thing. When you go out and you see it on highways and you see it on bridges, they're still using lead-based paint on those structures. Why? Probably the best darn surface coating that was ever manufactured. It lasts forever. Made it great, and boy, it'll kill you just as bad. So what we're really hoping for is that, number one, you find out, you test, and like anything else, it'll be a snapshot of what that child's level is on that specific day.
Right.
And that could change over time. This is also why there's hope that if you do find out about it and we can figure out where the lead's coming from, we can eliminate that in their bloodstream. We cannot reverse lead poisoning, but we can control the pathway into the system, and we can sever the source, because those are all physical things that we can do and get accomplished.
Certainly.
Anyway, that's all I got to say. We hope that you enjoyed this episode of For the Health of Cowley County. Get the lead out, and remember to give us a call if you have any more questions. And until the next time, we hope you all
stay well.
Stay well. Thanks. Thank you for joining us for this edition of For the Health of It, Cowley County. We hope you found it useful and that you'll tell your friends and give us a listen again during future episodes. As always, we end today's segment by replaying a recent Public Health Minute, which is a weekly radio message focused on keeping you healthy. So, until next time, stay well, everyone. Welcoming a new baby into the world is one of the most rewarding experiences that life has to offer, but it can also be very overwhelming, especially for first-time families. That's why this fall, the Health Department is teaming up with William Newton Hospital and the USD 470 Early Literacy Initiative and other community partners to host a special community baby shower. It'll feature educational sessions, community resources, snacks, and door prize opportunities. This event is perfect for new or expecting families. Plus, every attendee can get one free professional maternity or baby picture taken at the event. The baby shower will be held at the Physicians Pavilion on Saturday, November 4th from 9 a.m. to noon. There's no charge to attend. For more information, contact the Health Department or visit our website. Helping new families off to a healthy start. It's just one more way the Health Department works hard every day to help you stay well.